everyone for joining us. We have a lot of bearded people on the panel, so hopefully I don't get confused about who's who. But we have Evan from PubMatic right in the middle here. We have Jeff from Advanced Digital. We have Rich from Meredith. We have Mike Smith from Hearst. And we have Aaron from NBCUniversal. So the panel is called Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls. Waterfalls refer to how publishers set up their ad servers to flow from pool to pool of inventory. And most often we have the direct sold campaigns on top and the programmatic further on the bottom. And there are some real downsides to the approach, as Kirk talked about. So to start with, let's just define the waterfall in publisher terms. So Jeff, could you give us a definition of the waterfall?
Thanks. I think you just did. I think you just defined it as being a direct sold campaign sits on top. We are a publisher with 12 local markets. The inventory belongs to the local markets in their conception of things. So we always service direct sold campaigns as the highest level of priority. We take what we lovingly call our remnant inventory, that is to say what the direct sold campaigns did not sell, and then break that up through multiple SSPs in an effort to maximize the value of every impression that we have. It's a really inefficient process, as you say, and it's something that we're very much working on changing. But it's the traditional way of doing it. It's served us well. But as we see programmatic beginning to become a thing in a really real sense, we know that we must quickly evolve away from it, and we're working on doing that now. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question, Sarah?
It does. Great. And so, how, as you kind of referenced, how a publisher sets up their waterfall really depends on what their overall goals are, what their strategies are, how much direct sold inventory they have, if they have a hot private marketplace set up. So maybe to start with, Rich, you can talk a little bit about how you guys structure your waterfall and the strategy behind that.
Sure, yeah. So I think ours is, we have a pretty progressive setup in terms of our waterfall. Like Jeff was just saying, right? Like a typical publisher waterfall probably starts with, DFP's our ad server, so we've got, sponsorships at priority 1 and 2, and then you've got your, your highly targeted, direct campaigns, then, then your standard direct campaigns, and then you've kind of got your top tier programmatic, right? And then maybe below that, your second tier programmatic, all the way until you get, down to the very bottom. The way we set it up is we've completely differentiated between our open marketplace and our private marketplace. So while the sponsorships are still at priority 1 and 2, we actually keep our private marketplace line items at a priority just underneath those. So above the vast majority of our direct sold campaigns. We set it up like that primarily with the thinking that the auction-based buyers, they're going to be more interested in that, very specifically cookie-targeted impression, early session impressions, while the, I guess the, kind of your standard direct sold campaigns, right? They just have an overall impression goal with a start date and end date. They're not as picky, so let the choosiest buyers be the choosiest. So that's worked well for us. We were able to command a really high CPM in the private marketplace, but it's not without its challenges. It requires kind of a constant balancing act of rejiggering those priorities to ensure our none of our direct sold campaigns underdeliver. But overall, it's something that I think differentiates us in the marketplace, and we like it.
And Mike, how is your strategy similar to or different to Meredith's? How does it compare?
It's comparable. The waterfall, in my view, in my opinion, is a function of a publisher trying to run on multiple exchanges, but one of those exchanges owns and operates the ad server, which governs the distribution of impressions on exchanges. So in the ideal, in my opinion, we would, as publishers, have an ad server that allowed us to have essentially a flat auction. Picture selling your guitar on, or offering your guitar at auction on eBay, but also offering your guitar, that same guitar, at auction on Ubid, which is another eBay-like auctioneer. And both exchanges, both auctioneers, getting the best possible price, putting that forward in direct competition with each other, and then the publisher offering the impression of the highest bidder. We can't run that kind of a flat auction because there's one dominant player that runs the ad server and the most dominant exchange, so all the other exchanges are disadvantaged in that we have to waterfall them. But that to me is the fundamental reason why publishers are operating waterfalls in similar and dissimilar ways.
Got it. And what about you? Wait, I'm trying to remember your name. Jeff.
No problem.
Jeff. What's your strategy?
So in our case, we're a publisher. We have 12 local markets, so we use OAS as an ad server for our direct sold campaigns. And we give those, by definition, the highest priorities. The CPMs that we achieve for our direct sold inventory in our local markets is pretty healthy. We can't match it any other way, so we give that a higher priority. From there, we serve to our national accounts as a second level, just slightly behind our local markets in terms of the priority we put on it. From there, we break it down into a private marketplace. We do some network traffic, and then we have an open exchange. So we're operating at multiple levels. We use multiple SSPs in terms of the programmatic component. We break our inventory in slices, and we hand it out to one SSP or another. The benefits of that is that we can find really good value. Some SSPs have better access to inventory than others. We have better audience match between some SSPs and others. The downside of it is that by segmenting our audience, we don't have any real intelligence in terms of how we tie in the demand that we have with available inventory, both from an inventory and from a data perspective. It's really wildly inefficient. What we're trying to do, I think to the point that you made earlier, was to very much focus our inventory around the idea of democratizing the bid to the point where we have the most valuable impression wins every time, regardless of who sold it. Our ultimate job is to generate revenue for the business, and having a market-first mentality puts us into a frame where we can't really get the most value out of every impression. We may sell an impression at a $10 CPM in a local market to an auto intender, but that same individual may be a very highly qualified member of a political audience that could garner a $20 CPM in an open bidding environment. So making it possible for us to run all of our SSPs in parallel and to find inventory opportunities based on both the individual from an inventory perspective and from a data perspective. Increasingly, we're seeing data as being a really huge component of our inventory strategy. Gives us much more flexibility in terms of how we actually monetize the available impressions in our ad servers. And ultimately, that's the goal. We want to democratize it. We want to charge the highest CPM we can for each individual ad call. And waterfalling does not allow us to do that. So we're very much trying to solve for that problem right now.
And I think that you referenced again a big problem, which is that you have to kind of choose beforehand. If you think someone's going to be that $10 auto intender or $25 something, there's no opportunity to bring those two bids in at the same time right
Correct.
now.
Yeah, very much so.
And Aaron?
Sure. So before I talk about the waterfall, which I think is a tactic, I want to talk more about strategically in terms of what we're looking to do with our clients. And so, our focus is how do we help our clients sell their products and services? That should be the general focus of everybody up here from a publisher standpoint. And I think that, then we look at how do we apply tactics that help support that. And I think there's sort of, if you bucket into two general buckets of a client is trying to reach audience or a client is trying to associate themselves with content. So Linda Boff was up here and she talked earlier about how they're not using programmatic, but they're doing a lot of other things in terms of how they associate themselves with specific types of content. And again, goes to the conversation that we would have at the very outset with a client like that. For us, they're not doing programmatic, that's okay. They may choose to engage in audience targeting one day. We do foul inventions with them, which is a great piece of branded content that we utilize and distribute across our network. But in terms of when a client is trying to reach a specific audience, then we're thinking about how do we arrange our inventory to support reaching that audience at scale. And I think one of the challenges, and Michael Caston actually alluded to it earlier in his speech, is that the supply for different pieces of inventory and the tech that's applied to those different pieces of inventory is dramatically different. So what we do in display is going to be very different from what we do in video. It's going to be very different from what we do in mobile and in television to come. And so, display, we've got tons of display inventory. So the way we arrange our tech stack is going to be different because of our ability to scale an audience and display versus video where we have very scarce inventory. We do have a lot of it, but we sell a lot of it on a direct basis. So what we have available for audience targeting is going to be arranged very differently. And so, in this last upfront, we've come up with a strategy which is really focused on maximizing audience scale for our premier customers and helping them achieve their marketing goals. And we feel very comfortable about what we've done so far. I think, look, the technology is continuing to evolve in terms of the tactics, whether it's header bidding, whether it's rearranging the stack and putting private exchange on top. And we could debate those, and I expect that we'll try, and there'll be more different technologies that will evolve over time in that regard. But ultimately, I would bring it back to the conversation with a client about what are we helping that client achieve. And we're seeing a lot more of audience targeting and a lot more of data coming into the equation, and what tactics we're going to use to help support that.
And so I think in some of the setups that you guys mentioned, there's also some header bidding going on. So by a show of hands, can I get which publishers are using header bidding today?
We're supporting header bidding.
Okay.
We're halfway there.
Okay, halfway there.
We're kind of halfway there right now.
So let's start with you, Rich, because I know that Meredith has kind of a more unique setup that, as you mentioned, allows the private marketplaces to go just below those top-tier sponsorships.
Right. So just a little bit more about our header bidding setup.
Sure.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, I guess the waterfall that I was explaining before, I failed to mention it, but the line items that are trafficked above a lot of our direct sold stuff, those are only header bidding line items, and they have to be, right? Because one of the advantages on the publisher side to header bidding, right, is you're able to leverage the exact bid amount or close or within a range. That's a whole nother topic, but let's just, for argument's sake, say the exact bid amount within ad decisioning, right? It's not just like a proxy CPM that you've assigned to the line item in DFP. So it works because it makes it makes AdEx and EDA work harder because it has a very specific bid amount that it needs to compete against. And I think it's working well on the buy side too, judging by the CPMs that we're able to command through a private marketplace. They're 5 to 6x higher than the open market. But I'll be completely honest, I have yet to have a conversation with someone on the buy side, right? I get a lot of requests that, hey, we want prioritized look or we want first look, but I haven't heard any anecdotes that, along the lines of, I want prioritized look because I know that header bidding gives me X% lift above what I'm seeing with publishers who are not user header bidding. So while I'd like to think that it's working, I guess I don't have any really definitive proof. I don't know if any of you guys have anything to share or if you do, but that's kind of where we stand right now.
And actually, Evan, would you mind giving us your definition of header bidding for people who aren't as familiar with the term?
Sure. So as opposed to a waterfall setup where the primary ad server gets the impression first and then it falls through if there isn't a line item that matches, it gets handed off to one or more indirect line items, and then those are sorted by estimated CPM. The idea is that you look at every impression, or maybe nearly every impression, and you see what you can get through an open exchange, and then you compare that against what's happening in your direct ad server, and you try to have a much more dynamic environment, which has a couple of advantages. One is, as Rich was saying, you have this first look, and it would be interesting to see exactly what the data is and the impact of that, but it means that buyers get to see impressions that they wouldn't see at all before. So, with a waterfall, you serve a bunch of direct, and then you don't need to serve anymore because it's on pace, or it's finished serving, and then whatever impressions are left are going to indirect monetization. And it very well may be that the impressions that would do best in either a private marketplace or open exchange were the ones that came if to Aaron's point, they're going after a brand association with content as opposed to specific audience targeting, they may not have cared which impression it was. So that's really the idea, is it's a more sophisticated approach to making sure that each impression is going to get the maximum value. And it's something that we support, and we have a few different variations of how we do this with our Decision Manager product.
Great. And Mike, you mentioned earlier that you're kind of forced into a waterfall setup because there's a major player that owns an exchange and an ad server. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about how header bidding might be an alternative to that dynamic that exists today in the marketplace.
Sure. I hope I didn't say forced, because we choose to do business with Google. But I take your point. And header bidding, I would characterize it in a non-technical way as just another way to bias the auction system or the meta auction system. If you instead look at it as I do, where you have multiple auction systems and an idealized, perfect auction state, every impression is sold to the highest bidder without bias. But markets don't work that way. I mean, the financial markets don't work that way. I mean, it's hard or impossible to get access to a Facebook IPO or a Twitter IPO. And it's, you could think of eBay as my earlier example as a biased marketplace too. You put that guitar up for auction, there's some amount of likelihood that you're going to get a phone call from one of the bidders to see if you can cut the deal offline. And many people do cut that deal offline if the price is right. So there are examples of biases in various auction systems, and these are biases in media auction systems. So header bidding is sometimes a dictate from certain buyers. Xaxis uses header bidding, Amazon uses header bidding, YieldByte uses header bidding, which Kathy's involved with that company. And these are all different methods of conducting commerce.
And Aaron, why is header bidding not a tactic that you're using today?
So again, I'll take another step back here in terms of, if you sort of look at the evolution of ad tech, and sort of the way this started is the clients or the agencies, the clients had data asymmetrically from what the publishers have, right? So they know what audience they're going after, and we don't necessarily know. We put it into this auction, and they're bidding on a particular audience. And I don't know that that's the best end goal for both parties, right? Our goal is to, on an ongoing basis, help P&G, help Target, help GE, help our partner companies sell their products. And I think if we're going to have a symbiotic relationship in that way, it's best for us to sort of, share as much information as possible. I sort of look at, it's probably not the perfect analogy for what's going on with header bidding, but it's sort of like the publisher's tactics to in some ways counter what's going on with the asymmetry of data. And it's sort of like, for those of you old enough in the audience, it's like spy versus spy, and trying to, what's the next thing that we're going to do to try and figure out a way to leg up to inch out an incremental few cents on a transaction. And I don't know that that's the best in terms of producing the best results on an ongoing basis for the clients. And so header bidding may ultimately be a tactic that supports that. And it may be the best way to try and get clients' audience at scale. We haven't come to that conclusion one way or another yet. It's something that we're looking at closely. But again, I go back to sort of the original point, which is we're looking to maximize ways that we can work really closely with our clients, continue to have an ongoing relationship with them where we can optimize against their objectives. And I don't think that's through us not understanding what data they're bringing to the equation, them not understanding necessarily how we're setting up the tech stack to inch out a little bit better from an optimization standpoint. It's about how can we help them achieve their goals. And header bidding, is a tactic that could support that. We just haven't gotten there yet from an implementation standpoint.
So let's talk more about that buyer side of the equation then with header bidding. There are definitely some key advantages. You get to look at 100% of the inventory instead of just the leftovers, as I think has been said. So can you guys talk a little bit more about what you see as the advantages for buyers, and are there buyers that are demanding this position?
I mean, look, we have conversations about it, and again, from a tactic standpoint. But what the clients generally are looking to do is they're looking to get scale against, in our case, premium inventory, and it's a way to get scale. It's knowing that they're not going to be, the call after the sponsorship and the direct and the first premium programmatic and so on down the chain. They want to move up and be able to see those potential audience matches on a greater basis. Again, I think different types of inventory requires that at different variants. Display, because there's so much of it. You may not need a header bidding in order to get scale of that audience. In video, where it's much scarcer, particularly in premium video, there may be advantages that header bidding will help support trying to get the scale of audience for a particular audience before you have to deliver against your direct campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right on, right? So it depends on how sold out the inventory is, because the more scarce it is, then the fewer impressions you have to look at, and the bigger a difference it makes whether you get to see them first or not. And if it's not particularly sold out, then it doesn't make all that much of a difference. But to buyers, it's about being able to find the audience, because they do have that data that they're looking for. And if they want to get scale, they need to be able to look at more impressions. As simple as that.
I mean, if you take Michael Cassin's points earlier about sort of, now's the time to look at cross-screen buying and planning, and so we're not there from a technical standpoint, right? If you sort of think about just from a video perspective, you have linear television, you have addressable television, you have OTT, you have mobile, you have desktop. Like, there's all these different pockets of inventory that you can't. The technology doesn't exist today to plan and distribute on a cross-screen basis, but that's ultimately where this is going. And when you start to think about arranging your inventory in different supply and demand sources, like, this gets inordinately complex when you're sort of thinking about that from a cross-screen basis. But actually, in some ways, it may simplify the whole equation, which is I'm looking to reach an audience at scale, irrespective of what screen they consume the content on. And to some degree, it simplifies all of the sort of things we're talking about, these different platforms having discrete pools of inventory.
Yeah, what we see is that we look at our inventory in hierarchical buckets today. We actually break our inventory apart in pieces and provide different groups of inventory to different SSPs at different times. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason on it. What we're really trying to ultimately do is to eliminate the concept of remnant completely, and to create pools of inventory that have more or less value depending on who our buyers are trying to engage with at any given time. Particularly when we bring data into the equation, build pools of inventory that are specific geolocations with specific data points supporting corroborating interest for that individual is the art form that we're trying to do. So I look at our inventory as going from siloed buckets to being a big pool. And I want to go fishing in that pond for the right inventory for the right buyer at the right time. I think that does two things. Number one, to your point, it actually drives better outcomes for our advertisers. We're not pulling segmented inventory. Number two, it makes us do fewer dumb decisions relative to how we separate that inventory apart. I hate making dumb decisions. I don't mind making a decision I believe in, but I hate making a decision when I don't have knowledge. And thirdly, it allows us to free our minds and let pools of mobile inventory and desktop inventory and tablet inventory exist together and be purchased together based on the buyer's needs. So we think that it really speaks to the buyer. It helps us eliminate bad hierarchical decisions, and it gives us, I think, higher revenue outcomes as a byproduct of the whole thing. So I think it's good. I think it's really, really good.
I'll add just a little bit to that. I think the buy-side benefit to header bidding, specifically from programmatic, from a private marketplace standpoint, I think a lot of it, the onus is on the publisher. They have to, share data with the buyer that show that first they need to alert them that it is a header bidding setup, right? I don't think there's anything on the buy side that says like this impression is coming from a header bidder setup versus just like a standard traffic line item in the ad server. There's nothing in the bid request that shows that. So it's communicating with the buyer, letting them know that it is a header bidding. So asking them to like evaluate that like in a separate pool compared to what they might be doing with you in the open market or in a non-header bidding situation. And giving them bid guidance too, right? Like it gives us the insight into, okay, well, your you're clearing at 625, but there's 40% of, there's a big pool of impressions that are clearing at 675. So with a 15% increase in your bid, you're unlocking 40% more of inventory, right? There's a lack of transparency on the buy side for them to get insight into those sort of metrics, and I think it's on the publisher to share that.
Is it possible that we could get to 100% biddable inventory? This is kind of a step forward, header bidding, I think, for programmatic, but could we take that all the way?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible, right? But it depends on what the objective is. And if you've got demand that's coming in and looking for guarantees, then that's going to eat up some portion of the inventory. And there are people who want to just know that they're going to get that reach up front. And that's the other factor. And so, like we're talking about evaluating, is this going to pay more or is that going to pay more, whether it's, indirect or guaranteed. But the guaranteed factor is a big factor that needs to be met. So you want to make sure you're actually delivering those line items and watching the pacing, because just because you've got an impression that's going to monetize for more, if it means that you're going to miss your guarantee, then that's going to be a problem as well, and you're going to have to make goods or whatever. So it could certainly be all programmatic, but I think the reality is for a lot of businesses, there's a mix of guaranteed business and various kinds of indirect businesses, because marketers are trying to accomplish different things.
But isn't the art form, though, finding the ability to not serve impressions that are in great demand for programmatic to a guaranteed order?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is exactly it. So it isn't, this one is $4 and that one is $5. It's these guaranteed ones are going to be okay and get delivered. And given those, there are, however many, 1 million impressions left. Which million out of the total 10 million are going to monetize best in an open exchange or a private marketplace?
Exactly.
So it's a question of, not just like this impression beats, or this demand beats that demand for this particular impression. It's where should I put those million impressions that are going to make me the most money?
Yeah.
I think that's solved in a biddable environment, right? It's just an extra component within the algorithm, whether it be that phone call, Mike, that you get, about the guitar and make a deal on the side. Like, I think that can all be accomplished through code somehow.
Yeah, it can, right. It's just that one of the factors in that is the pacing of those guaranteed ones, and so that counts too. Yeah, absolutely. And that's how our decision manager product works today, is it takes that into account, because you want to make sure, and of course you can tune it, but you want to make sure that those are going to deliver. And then however many other impressions there are, which monetization path is going to result in the most revenue.
So I'll take the opposite question. So you mentioned that header bidding is kind of a way for direct campaigns and programmatic campaigns to kind of play nice together. But we're also seeing some publishers just opt out of programmatic altogether. The name Refinery29 has come up a couple times today. That's one of them. BuzzFeed. Does that make any of you question the role that programmatic has in your company's future?
Not at all. I mean, I think actually if you look at what those guys are doing, they're using programmatic just in a different application of it, right? So they're helping to create content on behalf of their clients, and then they're going and identifying audiences to deliver that content against. Whether they're identifying those audiences through programmatic means or not is, they can discuss that. That's up to them to disclose. But they're very much in the focusing on identifying audiences that are going to engage with that content at high rates. And I would imagine that's done through programmatic or audience-targeted tactics. It's just, to some degree, this is semantics in terms of the approach to the market. I mean, yes, we all have sort of display-type inventory, and that's different than the application of what they're doing, but they're very much using ad technology and ad targeting to be able to reach audience with their content.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many different use cases. The first question I always ask is, what's programmatic?
Right.
It can mean so many different things to so many different people. I've not defined a consistent definition that you can apply universally around that. So when somebody says we're opting out of programmatic buying, I say, well, what does that really mean? And the answers are always surprising. I think every publisher has their own use case. And in our circumstance, we have a direct sales force that's out selling guaranteed orders. We also have a ton of inventory that we can monetize through other means. And in our case, it makes a lot of sense to do it programmatically. We want to go where the buyers are. We want to make it easy to do business. We want to be easy to do business with. We want to make our inventory as readily understandable and as readily available as we possibly can. And that works for us. If I were one of the organizations you mentioned, I might have a completely different strategy just because of a different market. So I think they exist in contention with each other, but also in cooperation.
I mean, Brian said it before, programmatic equals cheap. I mean, there's, that connotation in the marketplace. Yeah. And, that's obviously not necessarily the case, but there's an association. And so, of course, I would say, I could, we don't do programmatic because we don't sell cheap inventory. Yeah. If that's the sort of, if you follow the chain. But look, I mean, I think actually what programmatic really is about trying to identify the highest value audiences and use automation and data to target them effectively. Right. And for that, it shouldn't be cheap. The value that's created by that should equate to the value that's returned to the customer. And it's not really about a price equation at that point. It's more about what's the return on investment for the customer in terms of utilizing that technology and those tactics to reach their audiences.
My goal is to sell our most expensive inventory programmatically because we can identify exactly the right audience for exactly the right buyer. That's the promise of what we're doing here. I agree with you. It's upside down in the general thinking today, but we'll change that. That's what we're working together to do.
Header bidding can solve some problems for publishers and for buyers, but there are also some larger issues in the marketplace that it doesn't solve. Mike, I know you had some thoughts about transparency or the lack thereof in programmatic today.
Well, one area I'm thinking a lot about, and I don't know that there's a direct link, but I'm quite confident there's an indirect link, is when we run multiple auction systems and each auctioneer has its own cookie matching methodology, one of the reasons consumers are adopting ad blockers at the accelerated rate that they are is because of the amount of tracking they perceive is happening, they correctly perceive is happening. So there's the primary reason, based on the surveys that I read at least, that a consumer would block ads because of the ad creative. But the secondary reason appears to be not wanting to be so tracked. So it'd be ideal, in my opinion, if the infrastructure, the plumbing that ran these auctions had not only a state of equilibrium in terms of letting each auctioneer offer the impression for the highest price in pure fair competition. And sure, the publisher will bias that a bit, but the auctioneer shouldn't bias that, and certainly not the auctioneer that runs your ad server, which is the decisioning logic for all of it. But if there were standards that were uniform, and cookie matching would be one such standard, which would reduce substantially, or maybe even eliminate, the third-party tracking cookies for advertisers, that would quite potentially eliminate one of the two primary concerns that are driving consumers to adopt ad blockers at such a high rate. That's one area that I think is opaque, and it should be corrected and just made clear to buyers, sellers, and consumers alike.
So you want more access to data that you just don't have today?
Well, yes, but I would offer a different example with regard to access to data. I would love it if the auctioneers that I hire to sell our impressions provided us with the full set of data. I'd like to know who bid the highest, who bid the second highest, who bid the third highest. And I can't get that in full from any auctioneer. And is that the auctioneer's data, or is that my data? Well, the auctioneers feel it's their data. And so what they provide me is what they're willing and able to provide me. But I'd like all the data.
we have time for any questions. Yes, no?
Seems like there's one over here.
Ah. Can we call on this person? Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Rich, I'm interested in understanding a little bit more, like, I understand getting a better possible rate on being higher with the kind of better system, right? Getting a higher rate within your private auction. But are you guys analyzing what is that doing possibly in terms of performance and KPIs of your direct advertising?
Yeah.
Because the first impression is better in terms of performance, viewability, and many other metrics out there. What is that doing to your direct?
Yep. Yeah. It's a really good question. So the answer is we don't fully know, but we're monitoring it, right? I mean, all of this is test and learn, right? I mean, it's been 10 years of testing and learning in RTB. So I think you're spot on, right? If we're giving a significant percentage of our early session impressions at a lower CPM, right? Because our private marketplace CPMs still aren't quite there at we're selling direct. At a lower CPM than we are direct campaigns, then we could see over the long term, 6 months, 9 months, lower viewability, lower engagement, lower click-throughs on our direct campaigns. But it's early enough in our setup that I don't think we've got significant data that shows that that it has not had an effect or that it has had a negative effect. We don't know yet, but. Nope, we do not. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Someone back there.
Hi, Ryan DeChima McCormick from Rocket Fuel. So you talked about the scenario of when you're looking at, let's assume that your direct buy CPMs and private marketplace CPMs are either equal or your programmatic demand is willing to pay out higher CPMs based on what they know about the audience. Do you ever find yourself, if you put yourselves in the shoes of a direct buyer, is it fair to say that if you're not opting into a private marketplace buy, that you're putting yourself at risk for buying remnant audiences?
So this is my take. I'd be interested to hear from actual publishers up here, but I don't think that there's any danger of that today. That this isn't happening at scale enough that that direct sold campaigns are getting the leftovers. That has completely been flipped. But to the point before, right, that it is, and to what Rich is saying, right, it requires measurement and monitoring to make sure that you are protecting those direct sold guaranteed campaigns. So you're not completely giving away all the good impressions just because they're going to monetize, and it doesn't turn into this kind of situation you're describing. But I think it's quite a ways from that being the case today. What do you guys think?
So I think that the real challenge for us is to eliminate thinking about remnant. We think of remnant as being something where we tried to sell it directly. We didn't sell it directly, so we created this bucket of inventory that we'd monetize at low dollars. I don't really see that as being as valid anymore as it used to be. What I see that particularly header bidding enables us to do is to think about inventory in terms of demand, almost like airline seats, where we know that we have premium placement, we have premium data that supports that placement. We have the ability to sell our impressions at whatever level makes sense for whatever a buyer is willing to pay. As soon as you go into a remnant funnel and start thinking about first look, second look, third look, fourth look, it may be a fourth look, but if we have the right look and the right data for the right buy, it's no longer remnant. It's just matching a buy order with available inventory. I think it's really a cool concept that lets us really free our minds and think differently about our business than we have in the past.
I think we have time for one more.
Hi, Dana Caputo from 10 The Enthusiast Network on programmatic. And question for those of you that are participating in the header bidding space. Have you encountered any issues with forecasting for direct sold IOs in the future? And if you have seen that, what are you doing to combat it?
Forecasting for direct campaigns?
Yeah, so if you've got that header bidding solution in place, are you seeing that affect direct campaigns? I think that's come up a little bit. And tying into that, forecasting for future campaigns, how can you foresee that there could potentially be not as many available impressions?
So I'll start. In terms of our overall impressions that we have in our network, whether it be desktop or mobile web, our private marketplace isn't big enough, I think, to make a huge dent in overall inventory. So it hasn't been an issue from that standpoint. And second of all, I don't know, maybe I'm just jaded, but forecasting is helpful, but I've never seen it result in us saying no to a campaign, right? So I think it's a bit of and that's what I did for many, actually, Dana, I know we used to work together, and that was my job for many, many years. It was all about inventory forecasting, and I think it's a bit of a fallacy because, you're never going to turn away a sold impression. So it's a concern, but it's not a huge concern or a huge challenge for us.
Exactly. What you said.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Steve, how are you, sir? Good to see you. Mike, thank you again. Evan, good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff, thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Listen, thank you, guys. We are at the lunch break. So lunch is outside. Our meeting area for lunch is in sort of cafeteria-like seating in the room right next to this one. So please go outside, buffet, lunch, grab a plate, and meet next door for lunch. We will be back in this room at 1:30. Thank you.